trans erasure, especially being platformed as loudly as it is in the US in recent history, is an incredibly real and serious thing. Hello dwellers, welcome to another episode of Dwell On It, a series where I, Taylor, answer your questions about my lived experience as a trans woman. If you're new here, the content is typically about, as I just mentioned, answering questions to provide some better insight for people who'd like to know a little more about, myself as a trans woman and how I navigate life, the trans community, and often it can be random questions too. The questions get put into a grab bag, get drawn out randomly. So if you have questions of your own, please throw them my way by comment or DM, and I will get them included to be pulled out and answered in a future episode. If you're new here and you enjoy the content, please make sure to subscribe and like accordingly. If you're not new here and you have not subscribed or liked any content, please get in the habit of starting. Liking does give a nudge to the algorithms to help make sure that this message gets sent and seen more specifically by other people with common interests, of course, too. And then sharing as well. Whether you are new here to the channel or not, please make sure to share or continue to share, because my reach can only reach as far as I can reach. I know it sounds silly and goofy every time I say it, but I'm only able to speak to who I'm able to speak to, so it's on you to help me out, to help get that message louder and farther than my reach exists as it is too. If you enjoy the content, of course, please subscribe as well, because more people being able to see the message means more people being able to share the message and more people getting to understand and learn the message as well. I want to be straight up on a couple things here. I have no idea how the audio is going to turn out for this episode. It's 10:30 at night right now. I know for sure I have new neighbors and there's a rave somewhere. So I know that high pass, low pass filters when I'm editing might fix it, but I'm rolling the dice on this one. I was laying in bed a little bit and trying to figure out am I going to record tonight or not. I'm recording during a rave. But otherwise, I always like to try to start episodes. I'm still thinking about that rave. I still like to start episodes with a visual description. So I am in my living room / gym / office. Beige walls as usual. It is a little darker right now because it is 10:30 at night, like I mentioned. So not as illuminated as usual. I'm pretty plain Jane today. Plain Taylor, I suppose. Blonde hair tied up in a ponytail, thrown back, totally naked face, green t-shirt, nothing to write home about. If anyone likes to follow along with my claws too, I do have a fresh set and we're going off of a color scheme that's based on gray / silver, black, purple, and white. You can interpret that as you see fit. That is pretty much the long and short of the visual description. As usual, as I mentioned, I'm a 6'1" white trans woman. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so that's Treaty 1 territory. I use she, her pronouns. Otherwise, aside from that, I think we can dive right into Dwell On It this week already. So let's see what we can get out of the grab bag this week. Have hormones made you cry about anything that you were surprised you cried about? First, I edited out me saying cries 3 times. I know what the word cried is, and I know crized is not a word. So anyway, I was about to crized from that. In seriousness to the answer, probably, but I don't really know if I can pinpoint it to hormones, as in HRT. I can absolutely share that it's no surprise that going on HRT is essentially a second puberty. And for anyone who has gone through puberty or who happens to be a parent having a child going through puberty, we know that emotions are certainly not regulated as optimally as we would enjoy, I think is a really good way to put it. That said, this is where the things get kind of interesting. I'm 41 now. Birthday was last week. But nonetheless, when I started HRT when I was 39, even though that I was physically going through a second puberty, my body is still matured at the age of 39. My mind, my emotions, my logic, my understanding, how emotions would operate are now conflicting with a different process when it comes to the logic side of things, right? I don't know if that kind of helps kind of like see where I can't pinpoint things. So knowing that, what I can say is while I can't specifically identify how emotions have especially led to things like crying, I can say now at least the emotions that I feel are so much more authentic and clear than the emotions that I felt in a past life. in a past life, 24/7, every thought, every mental process, everything had a part of it being scrutinized, I guess would be a good way to put it, about wanting to live authentically, no matter what it was. If I was going through a project at work and I was working late and I was having trouble with a workbook, for example, and it wasn't cooperating with me. If I was trying to work out and I wasn't able to finish a workout that I wanted because I was burning out. If I was just trying to pour a glass of milk, if I was trying to hang out with friends, if I was trying to play softball, if I was trying to do this or that or the other thing, it doesn't matter what I was doing. Every single thought in my head had a part of it pretty much questioning myself why I'm not living authentically. So that fogged a lot of my emotion, no matter what. Happy emotion or happy presentation of emotion, sadness, whatever was instigating that specific emotion was muddied and blurred by me conflicting with my own self at the time. So now that I am living authentically, living happily, the emotions that I feel are directly associated with what it is that is creating and causing that emotion. For the most part, for most people, emotions aren't black and white. There's the reason, there's a circumstance, there's a feeling and an understanding, a need, a desire, a fill in the blank about this, that, or the other thing, about how an emotion is supposed to be represented when it comes to said experience or whatever. Different people experience different things in different ways because they have different values or different needs or different understandings about whatever it is. I'd love to say yes or no to this specific question. Have hormones made me cry about anything that I was surprised that I cried about? In fairness, I'm not much of a crying person anyway, and that's the whole logic first, emotion second type of person that I am. But that doesn't mean that I'm immune to emotions either. And you know what? Just like every other person out there, there's the peaks and valleys. But at least this time when I'm going through the peaks and valleys, like what is natural for all of us to do, I'm happy to be able to go through the peaks and valleys with no fog anymore. It's clarity. I can go through the peaks and valleys and know that however I'm feeling during those times, whether it's crying because of something really upsetting to me, or laughing with joy because of something really exciting to me. It is pure and it is unfiltered because it's authentic. I hope that's able to help give a little clarification on how hormones affect emotions. Like I said, it's a second puberty. And remember as well, puberty lasts a couple years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for some people, right? It's a ride. To be able to go through an experience and to know it's an authentic feeling, regardless if it's affected by hormones specifically or not, is probably one of the most liberating parts of emotions that don't get discussed enough. Everything's clear now, and I couldn't be happier to get to experience emotions clearly. It's great stuff. Like I said, it's really tough to give a firm yes and no, and I want to make sure that it's also explicitly clear too, that as I mentioned with emotions and feelings and so on as well, because of course emotions and feelings, while they are in the same universe, they're not identical in terms of function, but nonetheless, because it is very unique to the individual, I can't say that hormones equals crying more. But I can say that being able to transition gives so much more clarity and less filtering on the emotions that you have a right to feel. What are your top priorities? Functionally, advocacy. I lived 39 years of my life not being authentic. There was a large part of the back end of that I was starting to get into understanding that these are the things that are happening in my life and I'm going to end up having to come out at some point or another. I think I was around 37 years old when it kind of finally settled with me that it's something that I have to do. I still didn't have a timeline, but I knew that life wasn't going to magically fix itself. I needed to recognize my authenticity and live my best life. I had no idea that life was going to bring me this much joy, but I knew that I could no longer live with that much misery, right? Knowing that my life experience could have had so much more joy in it at such an earlier age if I allowed myself to find the courage and to show the courage and bravery to live authentically, knowing that I could have had so much more joy in my life by living authentically. regardless of the world around me at the time, is not something that I regret, but it is absolutely something that I want to prevent from happening more than it needs to going forward. Even though I am Canadian, I make it clear that I'm Canadian. I make it clear that I understand what my jurisdiction is, and I completely understand there's a difference in laws and policies between Canada and the UK, for example, and the US especially. But I also make it explicitly clear that any Canadian who thinks that what's happening in the US does not bleed into Canada is bloody ignorant. I don't have a stat or a resource that I can lean off of for this specifically, but I am darn certain that I've read something in the past that there's typically about a 5 to 7 year, let's call it a delay, for what happens in the States politically, especially in terms of big moves that start finding their way into at least attempted lawmaking legislation in Canada, whether it's federal or provincial. And it's just because of the pendulum of politics, essentially. I'm not saying that I have a 5 to 7 year head start on stopping a lot of the anti-trans policies from showing up in Canada, because it doesn't matter if it's a 5 to 7 year head start or a 5 to 7 minute head start or a 5 to 7 year delay. There's never been a more dangerous time than the present to be a person like myself, and I'm white. I want to make that clear. As a white trans woman, to be loud and calling things out, I'm doing the best that I can to use my privilege of at least being white to try to get heard, because there's no question trans individuals who are also people of color, let alone any other vulnerable community, whether they're from a different country, right? If they're a newcomer, whether if they've got a disability or not, whether if they're, financially insecure, whatever it may be, there are so many things that automatically mute individuals for no just reason. But it happens. As a white trans woman, to be looking around and saying, hey, trans erasure is happening, people have to listen, it's the least that I can do to have some semblance of privilege to try to get heard. To try. So I do all that I can with my lived experience, my ability to share a message such as life experience, such as trying to participate in, whether they're studies or surveys or conferences or meetings or communities or however it may be, to do the best that I can to stay involved and get included and call things out at the decision-making level. I don't feel as successful as I would love to be, and this goes full circle to stuff that I was talking about in the last episode, which I'll put right here in terms of advocacy and what I feel is necessary to get back on track with meaningful, successful advocacy. But that doesn't mean that I'm not trying. I'm doing more than observing, and I'm doing a hell of a lot more than succumbing and silencing myself because the majority of the world wants me to. When I say the majority of the world, a lot of people have this concept that, trans inclusion's happening here, that must mean everywhere. No, you cute, innocent little things. Take a look at any map of 2S LGBTQIA plus inclusion in the world. There's not a lot of countries that actually are inclusive. Then break that down to trans individuals. Now that's an even smaller margin. Trans erasure, especially being platformed as loudly as it is in the US in recent history, is an incredibly real and serious thing. That's my priority in terms of where I put my effort and my energy into. But otherwise, if I had to pump the brakes on that and everything else in my life, I will say that there's some people who are super important to me. And there's no question, if I needed to put 110% of my attention into making sure they're taken care of, that they're well, they're healthy, they're safe, they're happy, protected or whatever, right? If I needed to pump the brakes on advocacy to focus explicitly so that they are made sure to be taken care of, that's my priority. It's a different type of priority. If I had to put things on a scale, I would absolutely make sure that those individuals have 110% of my energy and my effort, if necessary, first, before I get back on track to emailing politicians and filling out surveys and calling to action and so on and so on. I'm still closeted and don't know if I could ever come out because I'll be seen like I'm different. Did or do you feel the same way, and how do you cope with that? I remember getting this one quite a while ago, and I'm very sorry for two things. One, taking so long to get to this specifically, because it is a really, like, it's a personal question. It's the magic of the grab bag. And then second, the principle of the message of pretty much being afraid to come out. And of course, I'm very sorry to anyone who's watching this right now, and even individuals who are not watching this right now who are afraid to come out for fears of their own, whether they might find themselves to be seen like they're different, or if they might find themselves to be put up against measures that are outside of their control, or so on and so on and so on. In a past life, I was terrified of coming out because I never thought I was going to make it. I had this in my head where, I was too tall. I thought that, I was not pretty and so on. I felt like I was going to get judged all the time. Regardless of anything else, I just felt like at face value, I was just going to stand out. Living in Winnipeg, we can take a look at the general demographic in Winnipeg. I'm pretty tall compared to the average Winnipegger, let alone the average human being. The average human being, off the top of my head, is 5'9". The average Canadian woman is 5'4". At 6'1", no matter what way I cut it, I'm still standing head and shoulders, literally, above many other people. And because of that, I felt that that was going to highlight me no matter what. That as much as I wanted to just kind of keep to myself, I had no choice, because just standing up would be the exact opposite of keeping to myself. So I had this major fear of not just looking like I'm different, but being identified as being somebody who's not of the norm, not being cis, right? So I totally understand where that came from. It absolutely didn't happen overnight. When I started transitioning, as in when I started taking HRT in February of 2020, I'd be going through the spring. And granted, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of lucked out because COVID happened in and around the same time. So I was transitioning on my couch. Even during that time, I still wasn't feeling like I was going to make it. I was still very skeptical of myself. I was still very concerned of the world around me and how I would be accepted. I was so concerned about how I would be able to fit in places where I used to be able to fit in with no question, on a similar scale, of course. After I came out on my birthday in 2020 is when that started to let go a little bit, because I came out very abruptly on my birthday because of a lot of things happening in the world at the time. What I'll do is, I know I've spoken about it before a couple times in other videos, so I'm just going to put one right there. Don't know which one it's going to be yet, but there it is. I hope you enjoy it. But either way, I still wasn't comfortable yet, but I knew that I needed to come out. It was only until a couple months after I came out socially, when I started to get a better understanding of the world around me, and especially how some people were treating me or not treating me, is when that fog, kind of similar to the same thing I was talking about in the first question, but a very different type of fog, because in this case it was a fog of acceptance, I guess, right? Like all these different types of fogs or whatever, but that before it was this, like I was talking about when it came to an emotional fog, it was cloudy, muddy, this and that. In this case was a fog of belonging, of acceptance, of inclusion, and so on. When I realized that the world's not going to get better for me, and it's not my responsibility to get better for the world. It's not my responsibility to fit in. It's my responsibility to be me. When that happened, everything just completely cleared. I remember that day very vividly. And I woke up and I felt that fire. The first thing that I did is I filled out a name change form and everything. I was still expecting to do that later. I was still just trying to get through life and so on and so on. But I'm like, nope, I'm doing this. I am Taylor. Get the name change thing done, da-da-da-da-da. After realizing that I can't be held back by what other people think and how other people think and how other people react to how they think, those are all things that are far beyond my control, which means they are absolutely not worth my energy to think about. That was one of the biggest things and the most important things for me to experience through my transition. Nothing helped me have more self-acceptance and an understanding that it's on me to own my space and be proud of the space that I own than seeing and understanding the world is not going to create a space for me. When it comes to how to cope with that again is kind of open-ended. It depends on the type of person, who you are, of course. There were 3 individuals overall who I was speaking to during my transition, before my transition even, and during and so on, all from different career paths and so on. So I was able to get some insight from the vast majority of them. One thing that stood out to me the most, I can't remember exactly what the term is, but it's about how to manage negative emotions. And so in this case, one of the biggest emotions that I felt before I started to transition was shame. And we have to remember that the words shame and guilt often get mixed as if they mean the same thing, but they don't. Guilt is an emotion, a negative emotion that you feel from burdening someone else. Shame, however, is a negative emotion based on self-reflection, of feeling inferior, or so on. And to handle a negative emotion, you must address its opposite. And so in this case, the opposite of shame, many people automatically think pride. It's not pride, it's vulnerability. It's allowing yourself to be who you are. It's not about boasting who you are, but it's about recognizing and having compassion to yourself about who you are. That's the opposite of shame. Own who you are. Appreciate who you are. Accept who you are. And after that started to get put together, and after I started to see how that made sense, it was a lot easier for me to do. I was a very guarded individual, big surprise, but realizing all I needed to do, make it sound so simple, was to allow myself to accept myself. This is my reality. This is who I am. This is my life path. This is what is happening. The world is going to be what it is no matter what. There are over 7 billion people on the planet. I'm significant enough to matter, but I'm not significant enough to make the world stop for me. That was one of the biggest things in terms of coping. Finding out what it is that was preventing me from allowing myself to take the steps forward and then address that specifically. So I could rewind that a little bit and suggest that if you haven't spoken with professionals, especially professionals when it comes to gender identity, for example, there's certainly great resources to speak to help perhaps peel that onion away a little bit and find out if there's more to it or whatnot. If all things are considered equal and I can simply say, own it, own your space, because no one else is going to give you that space. If you want your space, you have to take it. That's the easiest thing that I can say. If you want your space, you have to take it. It is not going to be given to you. And I'm going to tell you, the more that you wish and hope that it does, it's going to be more and more disappointment for yourself. I do wish you the best of luck, because when you start to look a little closer at the world around you, when it comes to identifying individuals who are different, this is a pretty diverse planet, all things considered. Sure, statistically, trans individuals is significantly less than cis individuals, there's no question about that. But start breaking down other different types of differences in individuals. Take a look at people who I mentioned earlier who are newcomers. Look at a percentage of individuals in a population who are new to a community. Look at a population of individuals in a workplace or in a sports league that perhaps have a disability. Look at individuals who come from an ethnic minority, and so on. It's not exclusive to trans individuals. I completely understand that trans individuals have a different type of vulnerability than many other marginalized communities. I want to make sure that I acknowledge that, and I want to make sure that people are aware of that too. I'm not going to say who's got it better or worse or anything like that, but I just want to make sure that it's understood. There's a little more to the process. And I think I spoke about that before too in a similar way, so I'm going to point awkwardly to the corner here and link a video if it exists. I think I know which one it is, but otherwise, if you want it, take it. Get it. It's not going to be handed to you. If you want it, you have to take it. You have to get it. Best of luck to you on that. Thank you for that question. It's not going to be easy. Everything that was a fear might still be a fear, but at least you get to handle that fear authentically. Has romance changed for you since you transitioned? Are you willing to share a fantasy? I'll answer the second question first. As a demisexual individual, my fantasy involves laying in bed and cuddling with someone who I love. I'm really fun at parties. If it happens to become intimate, then good times. But honestly, my fantasy is literally just, having a loving, happy life with someone who loves me back. get up, watch TV together, go grocery shopping, maybe together, maybe not together, shared bank account, right? All those fun things. I'm really fun at parties like that. I don't have any intimate romantic fantasies. I can play the game. I want to make sure that's clear again. I can play the game. I'm not unfamiliar with sex and kink and anything like that. I haven't had sex since October of 2019. And the last time that I was with a partner who we were both acknowledged as in a relationship by our peers or whatever too, I think was in 2018. Like I said, I'm super fun at parties. Has romance changed for me otherwise since I transitioned? Kind of. So like I was just saying, my last relationship, even my last intimate connection was pretty long before I even started HRT. But otherwise, as an individual, like I said, I'm still demisexual. I'm a lesbian now, so I'm still into women and so on. That said, I also know that being a trans woman now comes with so many more obstacles. Unjust obstacles, I could say. And they may or may not be in my control. All I can do is be the best person that I can possibly be. I'm my best self, better than ever. Knowing that I am bringing my best to the plate 24/7. All I can hope when it comes to romance going forward is that if I'm giving my best self to the world around me, and I'm giving my best self to people who are important to me, if I'm giving my best self to, people who I love, I can only hope that I get loved back, and they look past the unjust criticism, controversy, fear that they might experience because of an unfair world around them. Again, because COVID has had such a major part of my transition, just by timing and so on, it of course affects my social experience, my social presence. I don't do dating apps and so on as well, just because it's not my vibe. So a lot of my romance has always been by organic connections with those around me. So I wouldn't be surprised if the probability of romance is low, all things considered. Being demisexual, being a trans woman, being a lesbian, if we look at the math, it's not looking favorable. Right? Just kind of look at it that way. All I can do is just be my best self and hope that if someone loves me, they love me for me, and I'm worth the effort to be proudly stood beside. I'm worth the effort to be wanted. I can't make the universe operate in any different ways. I can't, wish on 11/11 or on an eyelash or stars in the sky or whatever else it is that people wish on. I can't wish on those and, force people who I love to love me back and so on. I can't do those things. I know and I accept that being my best and my most authentic self also comes at the risk of possibly not experiencing romance in a way that is meaningful to me. When it comes to romance changing, in a past life, I was trying to live a cis-het life and hopefully get loved so much that if I transitioned, she would still love me through the transition. It's not really fair for all parties involved, of course. So I don't recommend that for anyone, by the way. And I do know I spoke about that before too. So awkward finger pointing there. I have no idea what episode or chapter it is, but if I find it, there it is. But otherwise, in seriousness, I wasn't living an authentic life romantically before. And now there's a good chance that I'm living my most authentic life with no romance going forward. So if we want to call that a change, then the answer is yes. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch or listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the content, of course, please hit like, as I mentioned at the beginning. Hitting like gives a little bit of nudge to algorithms to make sure that other individuals who enjoy similar content see it on their homepage or their feeds or the reels or however it goes, depending on the platform that we're checking this out on. If you're not following me or subscribing yet, please make sure to follow or subscribe, again, depending on the platform. And also, please share. Like I said at the beginning, this is the most important part. I can only reach as far as I can reach. My message only goes to who I can get this message to, and I need your help to make sure that this message gets to bigger and more expansive groups. I need your help for that, please and thank you. In the description is a link to a campaign hosted by New Mode. What that is a call to action for your political leaders, your elected officials, to ensure that they optimize the corporate social responsibility of businesses, organizations, and companies in your community and in your neighborhood. So it takes less than a minute. Name, email address, postal code, hit send. There's a pre-written letter ready to go that gets sent with that. And remember, the goal of that is to essentially define how companies and organizations and businesses take care of their community. if these organizations represent and respect their corporate social responsibilities, that means they're creating also a safer and more equitable community, neighborhood, and so on for vulnerable communities in that area too. Like I said, less than a minute, name, email address, postal code, hit send, and please share that too, of course. Otherwise, let's wrap this one up. That rave that I was talking about earlier is done, so I'm happy to see that these new neighbors are at least acknowledging, the time of day thing. So that said, I hope you have a great rest of your night. Have a great rest of your week, as I always love to say. And I'll talk to you later.